Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the latest CMM Insight webinar in association with the National Care Forum. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the work the Care Provider Alliance and its members have been carrying out to review the Care Quality Commission's Single Assessment Framework. This webinar will focus on the recommendations from the CPA's report and how the CQC plans to implement them in the coming months. We've got some fantastic speakers joining us today, so I'm looking forward to hearing how the discussions progress. We really encourage you to ask questions throughout the session, which you can do by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please bear with us as we respond to those questions, and any that we don't do, we'll endeavour to answer directly to you after the session. This webinar will be recorded and will be available to view on the CMM website in the coming days. This webinar is kindly sponsored by Swift Management Services, who have recorded a short video to tell us a bit more about their organisation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christopher Stringer, and I'm a Director at Swift Management Services Limited. We are delighted to be supporting this webinar today and look forward to the discussions, which will, as always, be very thought-provoking and informative. Swift Management Services are a leading care consultancy and have been running for over 7 years supporting the sector. Our staff have all worked as senior managers in health and social care, in the independent sector and the third sector, as well as the NHS, in a variety of roles, including registered manager, director of nursing, quality and safety matrons, clinical nurse specialists, finance directors, chief operating officers and nominated individuals. So we really appreciate the daily challenges you face as providers, both from a hands-on approach and as managers. We work across England, Scotland and Wales, and we support small to medium-sized care home services along with other health and social care providers. We offer coaching and development support to managers seeking to complete their CQC registration. We also support with compliance audits against regulation, complaints resolution, governance support, assistance with regulatory challenges, no matter how far along that pathway you may have already travelled. We support services to achieve a turnaround and embed changes within the staff team to ensure ongoing compliance. We offer specialist clinical policy writing and review. And we can provide independent staff and service user satisfaction surveys to help pinpoint those areas that are great and those areas that potentially need some improvement. We offer support with registration and regulators. We tailor all of our support to your specific needs, and we do not simply provide an off-the-shelf solution. When Swift are supporting you, you can have confidence that we will travel that journey with you. We hope you all enjoy the webinar, and please don't hesitate to get in touch if there's anything that we can support you with. Our contact details will be available at the end of the webinar.
Thank you, Christopher. I'm now going to hand over to Liz Jones, Policy Director at the National Care Forum, who will be chairing the webinar along with our speakers who will introduce themselves and get the conversation started.
Thanks, Henry. And thanks to your sponsor. So I'm Liz. I'm the Policy Director here at the National Care Forum. And I'm going to I'm going to ask our various colleagues on the call to introduce themselves because they were pivotal part of the Care Provider Alliance work that we did to gather views and voices from across the sector about the single assessment framework. So I'm going to start with Lynette. Would you like to say hello?
Sure, yeah, I'm Lynette Walker. I am the Head of Compliance for Right at Home UK, and I supported the Care Provider Alliance in advocating on behalf of the home care sector.
Thank you. Then can I go to Amrit, please?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, my name is Amrit Sumal. I am the Compliance Director at the National Care Association. We represent and support SMEs within nursing, residential and domiciliary care services, and very much involved in CPA work.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amrit. Then can I go to Emma, please?
Thanks, Liz. I'm Emma Lindblom, Head of Quality Improvement at MHA. We've got about 100 registered services across England and Wales, supporting older people across nursing, residential and retirement living type services.
Brilliant. Thank you. And then Louise.
Thank you, Liz. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Louise Bestwick. I'm the Chief Exec of Bradford Care Association. I'm also part of the Care Association Alliance, and I do have a small residential care home as well, and had some experience directly at the single assessment framework.
Brilliant. Thank you. So these colleagues are just some of the people who helped us to do the work between last September and December. I think it was a pretty rapid piece of work. So some of you may have already had a look at the single assessment framework report that we did across the Alliance, and some of you may or may not have been able to do that. So just to give it a little bit of context, you'll remember last summer there was a lot of activity and a lot of concern about the CQC's approach. So we had Penny Dash having a look at it all. We had Professor Sir Mike Richards having a look at it all. And alongside the conversations with Professor Sir Mike, it was clear that we were not really getting a focused part of the review coming from this adult social care provider sector. So we spoke to the CQC about that with Professor Sir Mike, and their response was for the CQC to commission the Care Provider Alliance as the umbrella body across the sector to do this piece of work, to get social care providers' perspectives and views on how the single assessment framework was working and what we would like from the future of regulation. It's clear that it was clear at the time that things weren't working. And we felt it was really important to complement and amplify, I guess, the voice of the sector, complement Mike's work. This was kind of seen as the other side of the coin, with his perspectives from the healthcare sector, particularly the hospital sector. So this piece of work was seen as complementing that and amplifying the voice of social care providers. So the people on this call and other colleagues from the Care Provider Alliance gave us a huge amount of help. Together, this was a collective endeavour, starting with a survey and then building on the findings of that survey through a series of dedicated workshops, which many of the colleagues on this call ran for us. And they're going to kind of give us their reflections in a bit more detail from their different part of the perspective of different models of care and supporting different groups of people. So we had quite a clear set of findings from our survey, and we shared that with the CQC at the time. And then we proposed these additional in-depth workshops that we structured very carefully, because it was clear that we needed to A, build on people's opinions, and B, get a deeper dive into the actual experience of having been assessed under the single assessment framework. And then we knitted together the findings from the survey and the findings from the workshop. And we're hugely grateful, actually, to everybody who helped us, whether you took part in the survey, whether you emailed us separately, whether you came along to a workshop. And then all of that was taken to the CQC board in February. So the chair of the CPA and Mike Richards took that along to the board together. And just really wanted to emphasise that we were very conscious that so much of the sector, so much of the adult social care provider sector are operating in the small and medium-sized enterprise space. We've got a lot of smaller providers across the provider base. And so we were working really hard to make sure that we were getting the diversity of views that the that the sector presents. We were not just hearing from one size or specialism of provider. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to go to each of the colleagues on the call, really, to give us a sense of the work that they contributed to the overall project and a few reflections. And then we'll hear from James Bullion, Chief Inspector for Social Care. He hasn't been able to join us live, but we have structured our session today around 4 questions. So we've asked him all the 4 questions that we're going to pose to our panelists. And we'll be able to hear from James after we've heard from colleagues about their contribution, the bit they feel they've put into this work, because it was hard work done at pace, and a couple of key reflections from their part of the sector. So I'm going to start with Lynette, if I may.
Yeah, not a problem. So I was very much working alongside the Home Care Association to advocate on behalf of the home care sector. In terms of the kind of the work and the engagement, it was obviously helping to make sure that the surveys were relevant and the questions were relevant to the audience that we were trying to gather as much information from. But it was also about making sure that that survey link was sent far and wide. We wanted to get the maximum amount of results from that service, so that we could make sure that we've got a really wide perspective. So we launched on making sure that it was kind of everywhere, so that everybody could access that, and it was about being able to kind of look and interpret all of that information. In terms of my reflections of the outcome of the survey, it was actually quite sad, because we'd experienced personally some negative inspection assessments under the single assessment framework, but naturally you do think that you are the outlier and it can only happen to you, and it was just a road of bad experiences. But actually that wasn't the case, and it was whole scale across the whole of adult social care, and that was really sad to see. I think we've had some really ups and downs in terms of regulations, and I think we were in a relative period of stability. People knew what they were being regulated against. They knew how to evidence all of that. They knew what was expected of them. And we've kind of just thrown all of that up in the air. And it just led to people just not knowing which way to turn, really. So although I kind of knew it from my own experience, being able to see it in the data that we were getting in the responses actually did bring it all home that now is the time to make those changes.
Thank you. Thanks, Lynette. Amrit, perhaps I could hear from your reflection.
Thank you. So yes, I was involved with stages 1 and 2, and similar to Lynette in terms of the actual questionnaires that went out, ensuring that we had a complete access in terms of the voices that were out there. So specific for us, ensuring that the SME voices were heard as part of the NCA. As part of stage 2, I was involved with the residential services workshop, and it was a really good workshop actually in terms of responses that we had. And I think my reflections really, I think there was a lot of anger in terms of the frustrations that I think we'd all felt in terms of the CQC and where basically the mess that they were in. There was a lot of anger. There was also a lot of consensus in terms of what they were saying, and in response to, basically it didn't matter about the size of the organisation. The frustrations and responses and the complaints were very similar. The only outcome really for us is in terms of those who were smaller was that they didn't have the necessary departments or the resources that the larger providers may have had in ensuring that they were able to respond to CQC correctly. In terms of the recommendations, 11 recommendations, I don't think it's a surprise. I actually like the fact that it's very clear and coherent, and it's straightforward. This is what's needed. It's there in black and white, and I think that's where the work that we've done with the review. I think this is where it's a great piece of work, and I think CQC just need to look at it and go, right, okay, this is what we need to do. So I think that was a really, in terms of outcome, it was a really exciting outcome. look forward to see what they do with it.
Well, hopefully we'll hear a bit more from James on what might do with it. Thanks, Amrit.
Okay.
Emma, do you want to give the perspective from a larger provider?
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Yeah, and it's a very similar tale, I think, to the other speakers previously. So yeah, we're a larger provider. December, when the kind of finalisation of the report was going on, we'd had 3 inspections under the SAF, all very different, which was, I think, part of the noise we were hearing from other providers around that different range of experiences. You know, very similar kind of input into the survey and then the reporting phase. I think my reflections were how aligned we all were. You know, as we went through the process, obviously being part of a large provider, you do have that kind of team of people and other people to almost kind of express that shock and frustration. And do you understand what's going on? No, we don't either. And what made me realise through these events, especially the residential event, was actually how alone people were feeling, because in those smaller providers, they didn't have that kind of, you know, group of individuals that we did kind of working together to sort of say, well, are you not getting this? Am I the only one here that's not understanding where this is going? So that for me was, you know, as others have expressed, was really worrying for the sector, and the stress it's put on individuals as we've gone through this process. You know, I think we've all had sort of 18 months of trying to engage with CQC and trying to understand. And I think what we heard through some of the forums was a lot of that stress coming out, and that worry and upset when actually people want good regulation and they want to put the people using their services at the heart of the service, and this was almost like a distraction. So I think that was the biggest takeaway for me, is, you know, that concern for the impact on people, both colleagues in the care sector but also users of the services at the end of that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really, actually, that consent, as Amrit says, that consensus, that alignment, I think really came out strongly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Emma. Louise.
Yeah, so again, probably very similar in terms of how we've all approached this, but I was able to bring, I guess, my own reflections from our experience. But in my role as the sort of the Chief Executive of the Care Association, I was able to speak with another 4 or 5 organisations who had also been through a single assessment framework and in assessment and really debrief on their experience and get some shared learning from that to support them, but also to support this process. And we were able to share the survey far and wide through our network of alliances up and down the country, and associations. So it was, and for me, it was really, what I was very pleased at is that the adult social care sector were asked to report on the impact and the validity of the single assessment framework from our point of view, and I thought that was really important, and it was really good that was actually taken on in the first instance, and it wasn't ignored, because quite often I think that can be the case. I really welcomed that. In terms of sort of my reflections, I think say, you know, this affected both small and large alike. I think it was the actual overstrength of feeling from providers and the impacts, and as we said, both on the actual providers themselves, their staff, and obviously the service users ultimately as well, was huge. As part of this, I also spoke with the local authorities, because again, they were liaising with the CQC, and that was presenting challenges. So it was making sure how they could feed that in as well. I know when the single assessment framework was launching, there was a level of optimism about how this might be approached, how it's a structured approach that really providers could get behind. And I think ultimately we felt very let down by this whole process, and it has really had a significant impact. And I think the best thing for me that's come out of these recommendations is the action of taking accountability for their actions from a CQC point of view, both the organisation as a whole and the inspectors, and then also that emphasis on sort of the co-production and simplifying what is already very complex for adult social care, but trying to simplify that regulation and to make sure we have a, you know, regulatory system that's fit for purpose.
Thank you. And yeah, you've just reminded me, we've spent a long time, didn't we? We spent a long time going through the preparation for all of this, and it all seemed very ambitious at the time. I mean, our session today is focused on the framework itself, but obviously alongside that, the CQC were busy changing their entire staff structure and their IT systems all at once, all at the same time. And you've just reminded me of about 18 months, 2 years ago, sitting on calls saying, are you sure? So I'm going to pop up the recommendations just briefly, because as I've said, if some people don't know about the report, at least I think I'm going to, if some people don't know about the report, they might not actually know what recommendations we're talking about. And we will come back to these in more detail. But if, let me go back this one. So if you hadn't had a chance to have a look at the report, there were 11 really clear recommendations that came out of it. And we'll be coming back to these later in the webinar, because we're interested in knowing which ones you think are kind of most urgent and which ones, well, we're all most urgent. The most urgent, perhaps, is the best way to describe them. But just picking up on the points that colleagues have made around the complexity and the understanding and the accountability angles here. There was a really strong consensus about making it simpler around the number of quality statements, and kind of having some consistency around that, because you'll remember we were all a bit confused about what constituted a priority one and what didn't, and what you might get asked about and what you wouldn't. And then there was a requirement really for being able to explain what the quality statements really meant. So back to that old kind of ratings characteristics style thing. Examples of what good and outstanding look like, and understanding that across different service types. Because I think there was definitely a sense that some inspectors were more familiar with social care and some were not. We wanted to make sure that the provider information return was being read. And we do think, and we still think, I don't know how doable this is, that there's no reason why you can't give adult social care providers advance notice of inspection generally, unless you've got a real anxiety and you need to rock up unannounced. There was a lot of concern around evidence, so making sure that evidence was corroborated, triangulated, and a lot of concern about those people who have been assessed to date under the framework and kind of what status that assessment has, and maybe we'll pick up on that a bit later. Everybody wanted us to go back to having a single point of contact, somebody we could talk to at the CQC, and everybody felt that the recovery work really needs to be done with providers together. And we can talk more about the CQC way as well. There was a recommendation that we help inspectors to understand social care, the breadth and diversity of adult social care, and we offered training. And we think that we need an independent body to mediate complaints and challenge, because we think at the moment it's the CQC are marking their own homework. And then it's all about communication, really. And I think we'll reflect on that a bit more as we go through the session. So I'm just going to stop sharing those, and I'm going to ask my colleagues to do us the first pre-record from James, and we asked James about the CQC's reflections on the CPA report, and to see what they wanted to share with us today. So if we could have James's first pre-record, please.
Hi everybody, James Bullion from CQC here, Chief Inspector for Adult Social Care and one of the commissioners of the CPA report. So my first reflection is one of thanks actually, and making sure that we acknowledge just the amount of work that went into producing this report, the number of contributions that were given, the numbers of meetings that were held, and subsequent to the initial publication, then the final publication, the amount of meetings that we had between us as the Commission and the authors of the report and the CPA group itself. I was partly shocked at the findings of the report as it related back to us how people felt about our inspection process. And it was a real moment of acknowledgement that actually we've got a lot of work to do to get ourselves to a position where providers' experience of inspection and assessment, firstly, has improved, but secondly, is a process that helps them and helps us by enabling people to focus on what they're trying to tell us and what we're trying to find, rather than focusing on the process itself and how difficult or easy it is. So I really want to acknowledge that at the core of the recommendations here is a need for CQC to change some of its culture in the way that it works with social care, and also do the practical improvements we need to do with the technical process, the assessment framework and our computer systems. So there were some shocking findings for me in the report. But secondly, the report confirmed some of our own expectations around what needed to improve, and the clarity around the assessment framework, the changes to the way our regulatory platform works and interfaces with people. For example, two examples where the report was confirming what we suspected that we knew, but it gave us the evidence, as it were, about the scale and the impact of that. So a very impactful report, really important for CQC, and important that we now take action together to do something about it.
So I think it's very positive that James is telling us that the CQC have heard the report, and that they've understood that that real change is needed. I guess, well, we'll explore a little bit more. We'll explore a bit more what we all would like that to think that would mean. But then, so I think it's really positive that the CQC A, commissioned this, and B, are listening to it. And I think that you will all want to have your say in the process. All of you collectively, not just our panelists, our participants, will all want to have your say in the steps that the CQC are going to be taking to hopefully implement the recommendations from the report. I think, though, I would agree with James, actually, when one of the points that he made was just quite how shocking some of the input to the report that we had about the experience that people had been through of assessment, and how that's really, really, really got to change. So the next question that we asked James was what they found most surprising or not from the work that the Care Provider Alliance had done, and from the combined and aligned voices of the social care provider sector. And although there was an overlap with the things that Professor Sir Mike was finding, I think that there were some really unique, distinct experiences for adult social care providers. So James is going to tell us what he found the most surprising and perhaps the least surprising about the findings of the Care Provider Alliance work. And then I think we're going to go to our panelists just to get their reflections, particularly from the different parts of the sector that they represent, and whether there's, whether something stood out for them from their point of view, or whether actually we were talking about a very similar shared experience, regardless of size, regardless of specialism. So the next pre-record from James is responding to which findings, if any, were most surprising, or not surprising. So let's hear from James again.
I guess the findings taken as a whole were in areas we expected there to be issues to talk about. So the frequency of inspections, for example, the understanding of the single assessment framework, which quality statements we're using, the overlap between some of the quality statements work, and the need to give some clarity about which statements we're going to use and what evidence we'll use to underpin them, and also understanding what good looks like, what we're actually looking for. So I wasn't necessarily surprised by those. The main surprise for me was the depth of feeling about how some people felt the process was for them, and the distress that some people experienced as a result of our actions. I mean, at one level, you know that intellectually, but when you read it and some of the quotes that people gave, then that, you know, it's shocking, and it's not a position we want to have as a regulator. We all want strong regulation, but we don't want people's well-being affected negatively. So that's the most surprising finding for me.
So, colleagues, I'm going to ask you about what you found surprising or not, particularly as some of you were either running or part of the workshops that gave the opportunity for participants to really voice their thoughts. So who fancies going first? Let's see. Emma, do you want to go first?
Why not? Thanks, Liz. I think it's really hard, isn't it? Because we were living and breathing it in the moment. And I think at the time, sort of, you were sitting, hearing the stories and hearing some of the quotes, and in a way it completely shocked you, but in another way you were kind of like, yeah, I can believe that, because you were hearing it so consistently. I think the two things that stood out most to me was the widespread impact of the lack of training of inspectors and the lack of a particular, you know, your named inspector contact. Because I think we'd all experienced that, especially, you know, being a large organisation, we'd heard of that through kind of our managers, but actually to hear it so consistently and then to reflect, I think, well, how have we moved so far away from a pool of well-trained inspectors to hearing these kind of, you know, the experiences of people who have gone through this new inspection process and felt like the inspector just didn't understand the service they were looking at. And that's, I think, on reflection, one of the biggest surprises, that we'd got that far into the process, and we'd got kind of that, it's almost like the knowledge experience at CQC had kind of been put in a corner somewhere and wasn't being used, which was, you know, on reflection, really quite shocking that we got there. I think, yeah, other than that, like I said, I think having lived and breathed, trying to understand, you know, joining CQC webinar after CQC webinar and seeing sort of the chat saying, we just don't understand, we really want to work with you, but we just don't understand. I think the rest of it, you know, around the needing to know what good and outstanding looks like, needing better clarity on the quality statements, that I think we all expected to see. But for me, it was how much we'd lost with those knowledgeable inspectors and the link to them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think with that restructuring of the whole organisation into those very odd roles, we lost a lot of good regulatory corporate knowledge, didn't we? And I didn't really understand. Yeah, I don't ever really remember quite understanding the new structures, so it must have been pretty difficult for CQC colleagues going through that. I would just add, actually, that as the Care Provider Alliance, we do have a plan to hold the CQC to account about our recommendations. And one of the areas that we've offered to help them with is that training of inspectors and trying to bring back that corporate knowledge and understanding of the massive diversity of services that they are regulating. But yes, I think I can understand why that stood out for you. along with just not knowing, along with the black hole of contact. And I'm hoping that they are making progress on that one. Perhaps we'll see a bit later from James. Thanks, Emma. Thank you. Lynette.
Yeah. So from the sessions that we had for the home care kind of sector, there was a lot of shared experiences from what Emma's already described, but also it became quite apparent that not only was there a lack of understanding from providers' perspective about, I don't really know what it is I'm actually trying to achieve here or how I'm supposed to evidence all of this. The generalized experience from people that had had a single assessment framework actually felt that the other side as well. So their inspectorate teams had no idea about what it was they were trying to achieve. And that just fueled this whole sense of confusion, which then, there was lots of evidence that was requested. That evidence was being, it just went into the ether. There was no real method in order to get that evidence, but such a heavy weight put behind you have to supply this evidence, which right from the very start just put that experience on a negative experience, because we've got no way of showing you how we're going to get this evidence to you, but you're constantly emailing us saying we haven't received the evidence, but actually we have actually sent the evidence. And I think that the lack of experience from the inspectors themselves on the new single assessment framework was really apparent, especially in the home care sector side of things. The unrealistic sense of expectations, particularly trying to get feedback from people and staff within the services. We had quite a number of providers that were, told that they needed to get appointments for staff to come in and to meet with these inspectors, which is great. Really, really value that, and I think it's a really valuable tool to be able to do. The only problem is those appointments overran, and there was very little consideration to actually continuity of care when you're dealing with home care. You take the main person out that's actually going to be providing care to that person to come and sit in an office and wait for an inspector, and then criticize them for not having a continuity, or it was just ridiculous. But those were the general kind of themes that were coming through, and I think that the other biggest theme was it doesn't fit everything. There needs to be a differential, because a single assessment framework doesn't accommodate such the diverse range of adult social care that we have. And then when it just all became over consuming, when you've got the lack of sector specific knowledge from an inspection team, providers were just feeling like they just didn't have a voice. They were being held to account to evidence that they were meeting a benchmark that was very elusive, and how were they ever going to get there? So it felt like a big uphill battle.
Yes. I just reflecting on what you've just said, actually, I think moving the conversation from going round in circles about what quality statements meant what, which ones should be prioritized, which ones shouldn't, whether or not we should be looking at particular ones to decide if somebody had improved, or whether it was particular ones to decide if they hadn't. I do feel like we're probably having fewer circular discussions, actually. Maybe. Yeah. I think we've moved on from that frustration of simply all of us saying the same things in different ways. But
I think the focus is now on how do we do that? How do we evidence it all? Like, give us the ratings characteristics, give us something that's a bit more tangible to kind of work towards, just to clarify the framework and what expectations there are.
Yes, and that's a good thing. But just the points that you've just made just kind of took me back to about a year ago, where we're still going around in circles, trying to understand a system that perhaps the regulator themselves didn't really understand. Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like we've moved, but we mustn't forget that was an incredibly frustrating and very difficult experience for people. Thanks, Lynette. So, Amrit.
Yeah, I just want to reflect on having listened to James. I'm actually disappointed and I suppose shocked myself when he said that having looked at the CPA report and the outcomes, that he was partly shocked at the response and the fact that, you know, the extent of the depth and feeling that you know, worries me a little bit. I know we shouldn't be looking backwards because CQC are, you know, are saying all the right things now in terms of, you know, collaborating and working together, but it really shouldn't have been a surprise to them in terms of the number of the number of us really speaking to CQC to say, look, you know, there is a problem here. You know, the quality statements are too complex. You know, we need to get this resolved. And I think that's where, bottom line, it's the culture of the CQC. And again, I think they've appreciated that, they've accepted now that and said, you know, look, our culture is changing internally. You know, having seen their own internal staff reports, you know, that the staff aren't particularly happy within the service itself. But yeah, I mean, reflection, great. CQC are saying the right things now, but really, this is not something that's new. I'm pleased the CPA report has basically, I think, sort of triangulated or structured the outcomes that we're all asking for. And I think it's really now for CQC to be saying, okay, this is where we were. Yes, shocked, I suppose, we're shocked about the outcome of the report, but this is what we are now doing. And we are hearing that to a point. But I think the frustration at my end, and I think for those of us, or all of us really, it's we need to see more than that now. We accept that you have been in listening mode for however long. We accept that your cultures internally were, you know, they need correcting, etc., etc. But I think on listening to James, it's okay, yes, you're shocked, but let's now move forward. So I'm surprised to hear his reaction because, you know, we have constantly been saying to CQC, you know, you've not got this right, you're not listening to us, but clearly it's all come as a bit of a shock to them, which is very interesting. So yeah, those are my reflections on that.
Yeah, thanks, Amrit. I guess you and I and other colleagues on the panel have had monthly opportunities to convey those messages, haven't we? So I can understand why you're surprised that he's surprised. Yeah. I wonder if actually I wonder if all the work that we did together was the thing that needed to bring that consensus, that amplification. Because I guess you might look at trade bodies like us and go, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? But when a huge amount of the sector come together and say, no, honestly, this, you know, we all do think that there's a challenge here. Yes, and I guess the positive we can take from it is that they've heard it. The remarkable thing was that it took a while to hear, perhaps.
Yeah. And the change in the organisational structure as well. Maybe that's what was needed. Who knows? But they're all saying the right things now in terms of moving forward. So.
Yes. Well, let's hear from Louise, and then let's kind of think about the so what that we're after, really. Thank you, Amrit. So, Louise.
Yeah, I think I was going to pick on a very similar point to Amrit, to be honest. I was shocked about his surprise at the strength of feeling and the impact on providers. So I think probably through the monthly meetings and other things, they started to acknowledge that there were possibly issues with the quality statements and the number and the way in which they were being assessed. And I understand they kind of just looked at some of that, and he expected some of that to come through, but that's all process driven. It's all very process focused, and what they really had no insights and a complete lack of awareness was the impact on providers and people in terms of, you know, actually the staffing, the workforce, and obviously the people who use services. And for me, that really highlights the fact that they weren't listening. They don't have a mechanism for listening to providers on the front line at all, or their staff. Whether there's a lack of a process for people to be able to feed back in an appropriate way, to feel safe to do that. There's an imbalance of power where providers feel they're unable to do that. And it just doesn't allow any point for people to be able to reflect on their experiences and for CQC to hear about that, because that infrastructure and that ability simply does not exist. And had they had something, yes, they heard about some of the process issues, but at no point did they have a way in which people could feedback their concerns, their thoughts, their impact on the actual inspection itself, potentially the inspectors. And I think this is why the part around having an independent body to oversee complaints, etc., is absolutely crucial, because had they had that, or had a process, all of this wouldn't have been surprise around how this culture, unfortunately, has fostered and developed into what it is now. And it's absolutely crucial that they do what they can to turn that around, because that's how they will work in partnership and get the most out of working with providers on the front line, if they can do that.
Yeah, I think the point about power is one that's come up again and again, hasn't it? And I wonder if that power imbalance is true across all of the sectors that they regulate, or if it's particularly acute for us. It's an interesting question. I think the point as well about their early warning systems, I mean, losing that relationship arrangement, you know, having a single point of contact, struck us all as a remarkable thing to do. I understand that they were anxious that those relationships might become too cozy, and that perhaps that might, you know, undermine independent regulation. But that in itself is an interesting observation about your own staff, isn't it? So I think the PowerPoint is one that we mustn't forget about in the development of the new CQC way. And a while ago, we did that excellent piece of work that looked at how to get the most out of inspection. And we did that together with, before COVID, with the CQC, with care providers. We had the Care Workers Charity alongside at that point to try and bring the workforce perspective, the care, adult social care workforce perspective, and to try and address then, well, perhaps 2018, 2019, that sense of imbalance in the power and the importance of building in respect for each other and kind of behaviours that were normal, you know. So yeah, that's an interesting reflection. I think we need to keep in mind power, because regulation doesn't just have to be about power, does it? Really? Okay, thanks, Louise. I'm just going to have a look at the questions, and we might let me just see what we've got. So one question, the first question I think we might come back to, having had an inspection recently, had cause to ask the inspector what they wanted to see to improve a score, and they couldn't say. Will there be a clear plan? Well, that's an interesting question, and I think one that we'll pick up a bit later on in the webinar. Second question, well, we're talking about the single assessment framework, which is applying to adult social care services. So it's in play now. So there's a lot of information about it should you need it. And Kieran asks, should there be further representation on the CQC board so feedback can be provided at user level? I do think the board needs some consideration. I think they were certainly looking for new board members recently, because the board has only one, as far as I know, member on it who has come from a care provider background. I don't know what level of service user or people that use care and support services. I don't know what level of voice is on it. But I certainly think from the adult social care perspective, there's an opportunity to bring more board level knowledge to the governance arrangements. And obviously, it's looking like we'll have a new chair. I think Professor Sir Mike Richard was the preferred candidate recently to take over the chairing of the board. So that will be interesting. So the next question that we asked James was what are they going to do? How does the CQC plan to respond to the individual recommendations? So let's hear from James, and then I think perhaps we might ask our participants to do a little bit of polling, because of those 11 recommendations, you might think that some are really, really urgent and some are just really urgent. So let's hear from James and see what he thinks about our question as to how do the CQC plan to respond to the recommendations in the report.
So we've had some really fruitful beginning discussions around how we respond as a whole to the recommendations. We'd really like, and we're really grateful for the CPA hosting, as it were, an ongoing conversation with us. We've identified a senior leader in CQC to make sure we pull together our response and work on it over time. I think it's more than a statement about what we agree with, what we need to work further on. It's more about a process of collaboration over time. So some of the areas are more straightforward than others. For example, we really want to include provider perspectives in our training of our own inspectors to get to this issue about understanding one another and to change and improve our culture. So things we can do pretty quickly, but there are other things I think that will take a longer time to work through, especially where they pose a challenge to policy or regulation. So we're forming, as it were, a collaboration. We're identifying people to work on it. We'll need to consider the cost and impact on providers as well as we do the work, and then we'll do this work over time. I see this as a program, proactive, practical program, possibly over a couple of years as we work together to improve things.
So an acknowledgement there that there's a way to go, isn't there? And we will, from a CPA perspective, we will be able to have regular conversations with the leadership at the CQC and ask them how they're getting on and bring help to them for how they're going to deliver on those recommendations. I certainly think that there's lots of people on this call who could help with the training idea, for example. So I'm just going to go back to the recommendations because, well, we can do it either way, really. Perhaps I'll ask my colleagues first to reflect on any of the recommendations that they feel are incredibly urgent. And then I think we might pop the poll up to see what our participants feel. I mean, all 11 recommendations were kind of equally weighted in the sense that they all came from the conversations that we had either through the survey or through the workshops, or often both. We've talked a bit about the independent body, and I really think that that is at the heart of great regulation, personally. Having somewhere objective to go if you feel it's not working would have probably saved us a lot of time and effort, if that had been in place 2 years ago. But I just wonder whether there's any of these that stand out specifically, and kind of what you might like to see from the CQC in the next 3 months or the next 6 months. So who wants to go first? Amrit, would you like to go first?
Yeah, no, that's great. For me, it's education and training. Completely agree with the independent body, and I think having had that previously, it would have saved us a lot of stress. But anyway, I think in terms of going forward, it is training and education. Looking at the quality statements, there really has to be a reduction in the amount that there currently are. And I think an understanding behind the quality statements, looking at what's going to be inspected in terms of your specific service. So there's clear guidance, really, because I think at the moment, it's a bit of a guesswork in terms of what am I going to be inspected on in terms of the quality statement. So I think there has to be clarity. It shouldn't have to be a bit of a surprise question. If you are going to be inspected, you should be able to know what quality statements that you will be inspected under. You know, it's fair and it's equal for all. So it's education, and then also I think we've mentioned this before, training the inspectors. You know, understanding the service that they're inspecting. There's many an example where inspectors have come into services and they have no understanding of the service, so that has to stop. So for me, that stands out. Those two elements really stand out in terms of the recommendations.
Thanks, Amrit. Emma, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I think I agree with Amrit around training, and then so for me it would be just using your numbers, you know, training inspectors and ensuring that those changes in regulatory approaches flush down. But I think for me, before you do any of that, you've got to do that service level guidance. I personally don't currently understand how inspectors know what good and outstanding looks like, because we haven't seen anything from CQC through this whole process about where they've pitched what their expectations are. So in a way, I feel for CQC colleagues, because they are operating almost as blind as we are, it would appear. And I think for me, that's where it all starts. You've got to have a really good understanding of what good looks like against the framework, whether it's got 20 or 34 quality statements, but what do each of them mean for different service types? I understand where they were coming from in terms of a single assessment framework, but there are nuances to all of our, you know, the services we provide that need to be reflected in that good and outstanding kind of guidance. And that for me is where it starts. And then I totally agree with Amrit around, you know, then that's got to be well trained out to inspectors who understand the sector they are going to inspect, and that they really need to understand. I think I can't remember which speaker mentioned it earlier, but where inspectors were coming out to services and they were like, well, we're not really sure, but we're going to go with this today. And actually, so they need to be put in the best place so that they're confident coming out to look at what they're looking for. So for me, it's those three, but it really starts with that guidance at the beginning point.
Well, perhaps we might get a chance to just reflect on the provider handbook and where we think we're at with that as well. That would be good, wouldn't it? Lynette. Yeah,
I agree with Emma. I think for yeah, there's absolutely training that needs to happen from the regulators all the way down. But for me, the fundamental is that clarity. You know, we need that provider guidance. We need the clarity that then empowers providers so that they know what it is that they're actually being benchmarked against, how they can actually make improvements, you know, and make sure that actually it empowers them to challenge appropriately when they need to. Because at the moment, that lack of transparency, that lack of clarity about what it is they're actually being inspected doesn't help the cause. You know, they kind of, especially as smaller providers, they kind of just run with the course, and before you know it, you've got very different outcomes, which are incredibly impactful to providers. So for me, it's guidance, those provider guidance, that's going to empower providers to be able to meet the expectation, and then it's kind of the training aspect.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, I think understanding about different service types was really important. Came through really strongly in all the conversations that we had, didn't it? Just because because we're such a diverse sector, and we are supporting lots of different people in lots of different ways. Well, and I guess you need to have done your homework as an inspector. You do need to have read about the service that you're going to see. You know, we don't do the provider information return for a laugh, do we? We do it because it gives people a real solid context about where they're going and what that service is trying to do, the point of the service, you know, who's it supporting and why and for what purposes. So thanks, Lynette. Louise, from your perspective, I mean, I imagine that there were similarities here with other
Yeah,
panelists, but
yeah.
also you might have there might be a few other things that you really want to see up there.
There's a few, I think probably just to reflect on James' comment in the first instance is, yes, we acknowledge there's a big amount of work to do and this will be done over time. And this absolutely has to be done right. I understand that. But what happens in the meantime? What happens where we in this space now where there's sort of a void, a vacuum, an abyss, where providers don't really know what's going on and how things are going forward. But yet inspections are still taking place. So that's my concern at the moment, is this absolutely has to be done correctly, but actually what's going to happen in the meantime? And I guess that then looks at how we might look at prioritising some of these. And I think a lot of these potentially can and will run simultaneously or sort of morph into one ask, if you like. So for me, it's the clear asks for providers. So do we really need 34 quality statements? Not with all the cross-referencing, no. Simplifying those so that then what good look like sector specific can then be done for a reduced number of quality statements makes sense, as opposed to doing the 34 to start off with. Look at what are the essential quality statements that we need to focus on, and then doing what good looks like for that. And that being a rapid piece of work which can be built upon in the future. But actually, what is the core, what is essential, that when somebody comes out to inspect a service, that actually can assess how that service is operating and supporting people. Then obviously there's the training, absolutely, completely agree with that. But running alongside all of that is good communication about all of those steps and accountability. Now, whether that's through the independent body or other mechanisms, but CQC, I don't feel to date have been accountable for what the changes that have been implemented. And I think it's really important that they're accountable, and there's timetables that they're held to account on. Individual inspectors are accountable, etc., as we move through this, because it's not fair. You know, we've really, providers and the whole sector has been massively impacted by this development, and the three things all being implemented at once. So I think it's really important that they're held accountable going forward.
Yes, that's an interesting question, isn't it, about accountability? Well, let's see. I think we'll try and do our bit, won't we, across the Care Provider Alliance? And I'm reasonably convinced that having some new governance might help. I do think the communication point is really important. I mean, we've always complained about inconsistency, haven't we? Before we got to this point, we've always been concerned about consistency, which was why we took steps to try and challenge that. But the communication, I think, is really effective. And I'm going to have a quick look after we've done the polling just at some of the Q&A. And I think that probably some of the Q&A is suggesting that people are not sure where to go and what to look for, because it's all been quite confusing. And the information on the CQC's website is quite tricky to fathom. So I don't know if we've talked about that recently at any of the conversations, and we'll talk about the CQC way in a minute. Let me just stop sharing and see if we can perhaps do our polling. Shall we do our polling, Lisa? Do you think is that going to work? Right, so each of the questions that you're seeing on the poll enables you to vote on whether you think, hang on, let me just see if I can get this up properly. So each of the statements are one of the recommendations in the report. So if you click at the, if you have a look at each of the questions and hover over them, you should get an option to choose A, B, or C. And A says that you think that that particular recommendation should, oh no, sorry, the top option says that particular recommendation should have action in the next 3 months, or in the next 6 months, or in the next year. So if you have a look, so the first recommendation, A, is the one we've just been talking about, creating a reduced set of quality statements. And there is logic to doing that early on because all the other things that hang off it will benefit from it. Statement B is our second recommendation, which is that one looking at the service level guidance for each quality statement. So the points that our colleagues have been making on the call, that we need to know really what the quality statement's trying to get at and what good and outstanding looks like, not just generically, but tailored to different service types. Then number C is making sure that that inspectors are organised. You know, they've got a plan in advance. They've read the provider information return, and they've factored that into how they're going to run their inspection when they rock up, because that's really important for the different types of services that we're talking about. Number D is whether we think we should have notice of inspection. There's quite strong views about that. We absolutely included it in the recommendations because we didn't really understand why it was different in our sector. Nobody could really tell us. E was around evidence and corroborating it. So rather than just listening to one thing that somebody said, looking to corroborate that and to give providers confidence that they felt that they were being heard. So if an inspector said somebody said this, and the provider could offer evidence to say, well, actually, it's like this, then that's what we mean by corroboration or triangulation. Then there's a recommendation that picks up the point about all those people who've been a bit of a pilot, you know. When the single assessment framework went live over a year ago now, so it was a year and a half nearly, wasn't it? It was November 23. Up till now, people are being inspected under a framework that keeps changing. So what does that mean? Then we had a recommendation about involving providers. So co-production to develop the recovery. And actually, one of the points we'll look at in a minute is kind of what do we think needs to happen. So there's a tension, for example, between asking the CQC to inspect more quickly and do more assessments versus sorting out the system while you are doing it. There's a need for providers to be involved in developing the handbook that's going to talk to us about guidance on quality statements, and not just present us with it. I think pretty much everybody thought it would be quite straightforward to get a single point of contact back in, but my colleagues on the call might correct me. It might be they haven't got enough people yet. And then we had the training point about really helping providers to understand different types of care and support services. And the independent body for appeals, some sort of ombudsman, independent assessor. And finally, communication. I mean, I feel that's got to be now, isn't it? It's all, I mean, the thing is, this is very hard. So I'm pleased that you're all trying to vote, but it is quite hard to say this is all, because we did think all of it would be immediate, but we just thought we'd canvass views to see if you felt that some were urgent, 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 whereas others were just urgent, urgent. So are people still voting, Lisa? I think they probably are. I better not vote. That might skew it. I'm going to have a quick look at the Q&A. There's some good questions in here. Yes, Kieran's got some great points. Should the CQC run a series of workshops on the SAF and what good looks like? Absolutely, they should. Colleagues might know what the roadshows are going to involve, actually. Am I the only one who finds it ironic? We're allowing, yes. Yes, anonymous attendee who's recognising the irony that the CQC need a lot of time, whereas sometimes we don't get a lot of time. Apologies for those who are not seeing the polls. Give it your best shot. Thank you. We might send the poll out afterwards. See how we feel. Okay, have we stopped voting now? Are we done, Lisa? I think we're done. Has everybody else lost? Has the poll ended for everybody else? No? Oh, okay. Are people still voting, Lisa? Yes, they are.
I think looking at the response, yeah, the number are still voting on the sort of the second question at the moment.
Okay, great. Well, while you're doing that, I'll find the next bit of the webinar, because we've got 20 minutes left, and I think we also wanted a kind of what needs to happen now and how things fit with the CQC way. So in a minute, I'll pop a slide up that shows you what the CQC way Safe Spaces platform is. So they've opened a new platform, online contributory platform, where they're sharing a number of early drafts of certain key things to help them shape their recovery work. And that, let me see if I can get that up actually, while people are still voting. That has a number of things where you can, a number of places to go onto the platform and look at these different questions. It's only open till next Wednesday, but it basically, the page looks like this, and it builds on the work that they did at their various days. They had CQC Way days in February. So the things that they are asking for more feedback on here is, why does the CQC exist? Purpose and vision. What should CQC achieve? How should CQC behave? How they regulate, and anything else we want to tell them about. So if you have to sign up to get onto the platform, but it's gone out in a CQC bulletin. And when you click on, when you log into the platform, and you do have to set up a username and a password, you then get to see these pages. And if you click into each of these, they take you through to more detail, and you can either add comments of your own, or you can like existing comments, depending on how strongly you feel about it all. And I do think this is a really good place to put your two penneth in, really, and say clearly through this mechanism some of the key points we've been describing now and discussing. You know, the point about what do we want from regulation, particularly what we want in behaviour, what we want and what we don't want from a regulator, because it's quite straightforward, really, isn't it? We want them to regulate for safety and quality, really. We could debate about improvement, but until we get the basics right, that's what we need. So I'm going to stop sharing that. Apparently I can see the poll results now. I've lost the poll now, it's gone somewhere. I'll have a little look in a minute while we're just contemplating our final pre-record from James. So the final question we asked James, other than a final message for us all, was how is what they're going to do in response to our report, our CPA report, how's it going to fit into the CQC way? Because there are some things that we would really like. We would like a provider handbook that's co-produced. I would like a charter or a service level agreement that says what will we expect from the CQC. So there's various things we'd like, and let's see what James says. Can we see what James says?
Thanks for that question about how this all fits together. So our Chief Executive, Julian Hartley, has been engaging in conversations with CQC staff in our stakeholder events, and we've got more engagements with providers planned to try to bring together a single picture of how all of the changes we're doing, the immediate improvements and the longer term improvements that we need to do, constitute one, as it were, set of ambitions for CQC. And I've put on the screen, I hope it's sharing okay, I've put on the screen a single slide that tries to bring these together, which talks about the immediate things we need to do that really are crucial, that both our own staff and external providers have been telling us. So, unblock your reports and publish them, speed up on the numbers of assessments you're doing, deal with the backlogs of information of concern and registrations, and then, as you're doing those immediate things, start to tell us what needs to change around the assessment framework, which goes to the heart of what the CPA report says. And on the left-hand side of this slide, it tries to, as it were, summarise the influences that are on us. These are all equal influences on CQC, and the CPA report there is one of those. So really, this work is right at the heart of what we need to do in the social care part of CQC to make change, and all of that though needs to be enabled by a reaffirmation of our core purpose and vision and a shared culture. And I'm really ambitious that CQC becomes more collaborative going forwards. Not that we're giving into particular interests here and there. We clearly got to balance the views of providers with the views of people who draw on care, and with governments too, and with the public behind that who want a strong regulator. But it can be a collaboration, should be a positive collaboration. I hope my colleagues amongst providers who've met me know that's my style. I'm really pleased that Julian Hartley is making that the CQC style through that CQC way work. So hopefully people feel that all fits together as a picture.
Do we feel that all fits together as a picture? That's a very good question. So in our last 15 minutes or so, I'm kind of interested to know what our panelists would want to see, the practical next steps. What, by when, and how? So I'm going to start with Louise. What, by when, how?
Oh God, it's so hard because there is so much to do. I think the most important thing is a plan, an actual more detailed plan. I think that's all very high level, with timescales attached to it, so we know exactly what to inspect, with a clear outline of what will happen in the interim. So there's a plan of how we're going to do things going forward, and we're going to do this and we're going to work towards that, but in the interim this is how things will continue, etc. And there's timescales established to all of that, and I do think fundamentally there does need to be a very rapid review of the quality statements to see, right, which, given that they're only in majority of cases, it's increasing each time, but they're looking at, say, 17, or it increases every time, doesn't the average number of quality statements they're reviewing each assessment? So I think it's a case of narrowing down and saying, right, which are the core ones, which are we going to focus on for now, that we can then start to build all this information, that we can then start to tell everybody what we expect to see, and we can train our inspectors on how they should be assessing that. I think until we know what they're actually going to be looking and covering, it's very difficult to start that piece of work. So I think that's probably my first, and I know they're doing other things around the periphery in terms of their organisational structure, around how they're reassessing, reassigning teams potentially, and looking at that single point of contact, which is great, and that might take more time, so I don't think they have sufficient staff as it stands. But definitely, that timetable, when we can expect to see things, what will happen in the meantime, looking at those those actual quality statements and narrowing those down. But I think running alongside, we need to be making sure they're thinking about how they can be accountable. So again, is there an independent route? How can they gain that feedback? How can they get true, honest feedback throughout this process in a safe space? Because at the moment that doesn't feel like that exists. And I think we need to foster that so that if anything does start to take a slight wrong turn, providers can feed back on that very quickly.
Yeah, I think the detailed plan is a really a good shout. Okay, Amrit, what do you want? What do you want to see?
What do I want? Oh, I think we've done the hard work, haven't we? We've got these wonderful 11 recommendations. And I think what I'm saying to CQC is, look, you know what we want. Let's get an action plan in. Let's get a timeline. That's what they want from us when they come to inspect our services. So, you know, the information is there. Let's put a sensible timeline in along with an action plan. Look at the priorities within the 11 recommendations and just start moving forward now. I think we've had enough, in excess of over a year of them apologising, accepting where they've gone wrong. So I think really we need to see action. We've done the hard bit, you know, it's there. I know there's plenty more collaboration and consultations that are going on, but I think really that we need to see action. That's what I want to see.
Action now. Lynette?
Yeah, very similar. Action would be good. A detailed action plan with timeframes of what to expect would be a really good starting point. I think, you know, I went to one of the provider engagement meetings that they had in February, and actually it was really, I did find it really good. I think that they, you know, there was a real sense of we are listening, we're learning, we're taking on board, but I also got there's a lot of stuff to do. And the one missing thing at the moment is the when. There's a lot of talk about we know that we need to do this, we know that change needs to happen, but we need to know when that's going to happen. And then my only other wish is when there are changes to the regulatory framework, that there's reflection which they have used and the learning that they have used, and that they don't just come up with different processes and that's it, they run with it. They actually use proper piloting, learn from those experiences, and then make the changes before they've got a finished article, and see whether or not they can actually drive some positive change as a result of that.
Yeah, test and learn.
It'd be great.
When did we lose sight of test and learn? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Lynette. Emma.
Thank you. I think I'm very similar. You know, timeframes would always be great. Like Amrit said, I think we've done a lot of consultation. I worry a little bit that we are entering a phase of kind of open-ended co-design. At what point have we co-designed enough? Because at some point CQC need to make some decisions about what this is going to look like. Pen needs to be put on paper and sent out to us, frankly, so that we can, you know, I feel like there's a lot of talking we want to listen to, but actually we have to have something to evaluate at some point to move us forwards. And I also think, you know, linked to that, they've got to work out how they're going to collaborate with us on an ongoing basis. We can't all go to London and Newcastle for big events, you know, on a continuous basis. I haven't clicked, I must admit, into the CQC website yet, but I think colleagues have told me it's not the most easy to navigate. I think your face is saying it all, Liz.
There's a lot of it. There's a lot of it.
Yeah,
but
so I think they've
get
got
a
to
cup
work
of tea. A cup of tea and half an hour. Yeah.
In the moment feedback from us that makes it easy for providers to put in, because it does feel like we've done a lot of the legwork up to this point, and I think they're going to start to lose the hearts and minds of the providers in that process. My last point, I think, is that I'm a little bit concerned that the areas James mentioned that are quicker to achieve training of inspectors. We haven't yet seen any hard comms on that. I believe it was mentioned in the DASH report, so it's not like they've only just heard it in February. You know, it's been a theme through all the reports that have come through to them. And actually, if you're saying that's a quick win, I think we need to start seeing some of those quick wins come to fruition.
Quick wins. Well, I guess it's a quick win if we're all prepared to put the time aside and do it, which I guess we are, because that's for the greater good. Thank you. So just to go back to our polling, I can tell you that the ones that were seen as urgent were creating a reduced set of quality statements and having a consistent set of statements for everybody. So we weren't in the dark. Creating that service level guidance for that reduced number of quality statements with examples of what's good and outstanding for each service type. Reintroducing a single point of contact. We all want that, like yesterday, don't we? And training inspectors. So I think there's probably a similarity of view from our attendees, to be honest. I think we might have a final note from James. I think we might have asked him for a key message. Have we got a final pre-record from James? I think we might. Oh, yeah.
So what's important to me as Chief Inspector is that we practically work on an implementation plan for this CPA report, and that is in the context of all the improvements we need to do within CQC. We know we need to fix the way our computer system works. We know we need to give clarity to what expectations are amongst providers. The key really is a more collaborative approach, and I'm really open to people coming to me, coming to CQC to outline how they feel we can take that forward. You might sum that up in our CQC way as a way of engaging with people and returning us to our sort of core purpose, our true north. That's where we want to get to, and we want to get there as quickly as we can.
Well, so I think the thing that would give us all a bit of comfort would be some very clear timescales, wouldn't it? And I'm just having a little look at the Q&A. Kieran's come back with a suggestion that we don't inspect with the CQC. We give it to local councils. We did talk about that actually, Kieran, in our discussions as part of the report development work. It was not an idea that was welcome overall, but the duplication point certainly was, and that's something they could perhaps sort out with the new regulatory systems. Training inspectors, yes, we have given some thought to doing that, and we're looking at it as part of the CPA follow-up work. I think that's relatively straightforward. There's quite a lot of ways of doing a teach-in, isn't there? Frustration around registrations, new applications. Frustration about the experience of inspection. In 23, shock, there's no guidelines. Yeah, okay. I think, thank you for those who have popped questions in. Yes, they reflect quite a lot of our discussions. So we've got 2 minutes left. Does anybody want to have a final key message before we wrap up? Any of our panelists? Lynette, Emma, Louise, Amrit? What I'm hearing is get on with it. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
That's it, Liz, literally, yeah. I think that's it. You know, I think this has been great, and I think there's real alignment in terms of what's being said. And yeah, from me, it's yeah, let's see some clear action now. So yeah.
And I think the feedback from obviously the people attending this webinar would be really useful to feed directly back to CQC. So it's not only our thoughts that these are the ones that perhaps you should prioritise. This is what providers are looking for, so that will really help as well.
Thank you. Anyone else want a last 2 penneth?
No, I just mimic what Amrit said. You know, we need action now. So we need to make that happen. Otherwise, it just invalidates everything. Really, it makes a bit of a mockery of it, doesn't it? If we kind of go into the lengths of getting people's feedback and then clear recommendations are just not followed through, it's just going to dilute all of that work, and it's just going to dilute their providers' confidence in change, really.
I think I'd just echo, I think it's Louise's points earlier about accountability. I think we do at some point need a line-by-line response from CQC against each recommendation, because I think without that, you know, to Lynette's point, some of this gets lost in kind of quite generic, wide sweeping statements about this is what we're doing. I think at some point we do need to return to all of the reports, frankly, that have gone into CQC and see, you know, line by line what the response has been. And I think we can push for that through the CPA and NCF and other networks.
I think that is a great final shout, actually. I really think we can do that. Okay, well, thank you to everybody who's been on the journey with us this afternoon and joined our webinar, everyone who's done polling, everyone's popped a question in, and most of all to our panelists for continuing to fly the flag, carrying on the hard work across the Care Provider Alliance. Hugely grateful. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the day. Oh, and thanks to CMM for hosting and making the magic happen. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thanks all.